Hello, everyone, and welcome to SQL Friday. This is SQL Friday number 27 already. So we've been going on for half a year now. Today's star is Matt Gordon, who is going to talk about dialogue with your data. And there are more words to the title. I think it's Interactive AI with Cognitive Services, but Matt is going to tell us all about it. Matt stood up sort of middle of the night. So he is, I think, the fourth or fifth American that we have had here, and we're really grateful for you guys making an early morning or almost 9 o'clock to present for us. Welcome, Matt. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. All right, let's get this screen shared and let's get started. All right, so hopefully you see PowerPoint. You should see subtitles start to work below the first slide there.
Yep.
And yeah, we should be good. I'm not sure why the menu bar. Are you seeing the menu bar on the Mac?
I do.
I am not sure why that is not going away.
No,
okay.
It's gone.
Excellent. All right, let's dive into it. Hopefully that's the first and last crash of the next hour. So yeah, this is me. This is the full title, like you said. And this is kind of a crash course for how the language API works. So we're going to just dabble in kind of most of the things that it can do and all the different ways that you can access that. So it could be, if you want to write a lot of code, the last demo is very much for you. If code is scary and you don't want to write any, then the first couple are probably more your speed. But what I hope people take away from this is that A, this stuff is really cool, and B, you can access it at kind of whatever technical level that you're comfortable with. So if you want to write tons of code, I'm going to show you how to do that. If you don't want to write any code, you just want to click and drag some things, we can do that as well. So these are all the ways to contact me. I'm SQL at Speed pretty much everywhere online. So yeah, email, blog, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, all that fun stuff. I am SQL at Speed. A little bit more about me. What I really want to draw you to is that last point. So I know SQL Friday is not a past thing, but in this year, any sort of community thing that you're involved with, that you're attending, volunteering for, speaking at, whatever, that's awesome. Please keep doing that. The worst case from going to any of this stuff or helping with any of it is that you'll learn something you don't know. The best case, which has happened to me, is you'll learn things you don't know. You'll make friends you didn't have, and likely you'll end up networking with people who may, find you the job you really liked that you didn't know you wanted. And so that's certainly been the case for me. The last two jobs I've had, I would not have had without community SQL family stuff. So whether it's PASS, whether it's SQL Friday, whether it's DPS, whatever, keep attending, keep volunteering, stay plugged in. I know it's so very hard at this time, for sure, this year, and probably for the first half of next year, but it's well worth the investment of time, and thank you for being here. We should be good. Okay, all right, so yep, all right, we've done our past spiel and all that stuff. So, like I said, I am SQL at Speed everywhere online, largely an excuse to show this slide. So these are some of the race cars I get to drive. Obviously, a few less times this past year than I would have liked, but that's completely understandable and okay. So if AI, data, not your thing, motor racing your thing, I'm always happy to chat about that. That's the only thing I like to talk about more than the thing I'm about to talk about. So on that note, let's dive right into this. So what we're going to start with is, if you don't know what Azure Cognitive Services is, that's understandable. Microsoft marketing always wins, right? And so they've marketed this stuff under the umbrella of Microsoft AI, and I'm going to talk about here in a second in advertisement that at least everybody in the US and Canada probably saw, but they don't really tie that back to what's the technical back end of it. So we're going to talk about that. And then once we've kind of laid the groundwork there, we're going to dive into what the language API is and a bunch of demos on how things work. And then we're going to finish it there at the end with what can companies do with this stuff. And so you're going to hear me talk a lot about like customer interaction and those sorts of things. And it's important. But what I hope people take away from this is not, well, I'm going to design this thing and, where I work, we're going to have a better website or we're going to sell more stuff. I hope, because usually it's data professionals that are watching these, I hope what people understand is that all of this stuff is data adjacent. So it's probably not day to day you're going to do this stuff all the time, but understanding how this works, understanding how to call it, understanding what to do with it can very much help you. And if your current company doesn't see value in it, then probably the next place you go will. And that's been the really fun part of talking about this stuff for I'd say about 2 years now. I've been working on it for 3, been doing sessions on it for 2. There are folks that will say, hey, I built this thing and I ended up getting a new job out of it because I saw something that you did. So the reason I have demos that go from no code to lots of code is that I'm hoping somewhere in there somebody kind of the spark goes off. They're like, oh, that's really cool and I can do this with it. And whether it helps you where you're at or helps you where you're going, that's all the more fun, right? All right, so let's talk about what this stuff is. And if you haven't noticed, you'll see the subtitles there at the bottom. And this is using a bit of cognitive services as well to kind of make this go. So this isn't the language API per se. It would be more like speech because we're doing speech to text here. And it's not pure cognitive services that makes this go, but it is a flavor of it. So if you've taken nothing else away from this, you are seeing it in action at the bottom of the screen, even if you've already tuned me out. So what is this stuff? It is a set of APIs. So you're going to see on the next several slides, there are a few bits of text that are in quotes. And these are marketing phrases that I actually like. So you won't hear me say that a lot. And I think Microsoft's marketing folks maybe haven't done a great job with this stuff. But some of the descriptions of what things are and how things work, I think are quite good. So I'm going to share those here because it kind of sets the framework for what we're going to talk about. So how do they describe this stuff? Very broadly. So like you can see in the quotes there, sets of machine learning algorithms to solve problems in the field of AI. That means a lot and nothing all at the same time. It has said that since I started working on this stuff. I would say it's about 3 years and 2 months ago now. They describe it like that because that is what it is. And so you are interacting with trained models and things like that you don't have to do anything with. You just call code and say, do this thing for me. And it does it. You don't have to train it. You don't have to feed it data, all those sorts of things. So by any call you're doing, you are actually feeding it. But so this is what all of this does. And like I said, you're getting all the benefits of what ML can do for you, and you don't really have to understand how it works. You don't have to feed it data. You don't have to train models. You just call it and say, I want you to do this thing, and the response comes back. You can call it with code. You can call it with bots. You can call it with logic apps. And like I said at the start, I'm going to kind of walk you through everything you can do from I don't want to write any code to I want to write all the code. And you can consume that in kind of whatever way you want. It can be consumed via standard REST calls. So if you're here and you're an app dev and you're like, oh, well, I just, I don't want to mess around. I don't want to click and drag and drop and all that. I just want to write a bunch of code. You can certainly do that. And the demo at the very end is going to show you how to do that. And what I hope you take away from that is, it's not that hard, because I'm for sure not a professional C# dev. But B, it's very straightforward. And what I show you kind of how it works and how your call looks and the payload that you get back is going to be common to everything here. So we're here to talk about the language API for about the next hour, but speech and everything else works in a very similar way. So if you walk out of here and you're like, you know what, that language stuff, not that cool, but I want to mess with vision or speech or something like that, by the end of this hour, you're going to have the tools to do that as well. So let's say you want to tune me out after this. You're like, this guy is boring, this is weird, but I want to learn more about this because it sounds cool. The Microsoft documentation, you won't hear me say this a lot, is fantastic. And there's a reason there's a link here, and I can send the slides, and if there's a site to grab them, cool. If not, if you go to sqlatspeed.com/resources, you can grab the slides there. The documentation is good, and it's not just good in that it tells you what it does, and for every call, it's going to say, here are the 10 parameters you need to feed, but it also gives you examples on how those work. So it's not just thorough, which is good. It also will say, and actually the last demo I built is built off, there's a ton of quick starts that come with this stuff where it's like, oh, you write C#, you write Python, Java, Go, whatever. Here's how you call cognitive services things to do a thing. And they're not doing that out of the goodness of their own heart. They're doing it because it's a consumption-based billing model, and they want to make it easy for you to consume this stuff, play with it. But everything I'm going to show you here is, everything that I'll show you here can be done on a free tier. So you can walk away from this talk and do everything and not spend any money. And then the next tier up for a couple of these things is actually quite reasonable as well. And we will talk about cost management a little bit. But yeah, if you want to tune out the rest of this talk and turn me off, that's fine. The docs are excellent. So let's talk about what the list of the current APIs are. And you're going to hear me use this term. So there are specific things that we'll call that fall under the umbrella of what the API is. But there are kind of 5 umbrella ones, and it's this list here. So Vision kind of does what it sounds like. You can analyze images, videos, things like that. Some of the demos you may have seen, if you're familiar with this, is you'll get like sentiment analysis out of a photo. So it will say, the person in the shot is excited, they're sad, they're happy, whatever. It will do that. Facial recognition was a part of this. They're very much stepping away from that, largely for ethical reasons. But Vision basically analyzes images and videos, and one of the cool things it can do is kind of show you how that state has changed. So let's say you have cameras on a dam by a lake. You can set this up in very much the same way that I'm going to show you how the language API can be set up to trigger certain things based on certain actions. Vision can be done the same way. So let's say it takes a photo of the dam every 5 minutes, and if the water level has risen to a certain amount, or it's showing a crack or something like that, it can then trigger a workflow to email somebody or dispatch a crew or something like that. So Vision is very cool. Not where we're going to spend our time, but definitely fun to play with. Speech, you're going to hear me refer to it a few times. I would love to be able to show it to you. Unfortunately, in the current venues that we have, It doesn't. It's a bit weird to kind of present something through a headset, and it works better if you're in a room. So everything I'm going to show you with language works well for speech. But I don't really have the ability to easily show that to you here and make sure that everybody's audio works and all those sorts of things. But rest assured, if you're like, well, language was cool, I want to do audio translation and text to speech and those kinds of things. If you hang out for the demo at the end, kind of understand what the API calls look like at their most basic layer, then you're going to be able to work with the speech service quite easily. Language is where we're going to spend most of the rest of our time. And all of these, what the descriptions say here very much undersell what all of these can do. So language, you can understand sentences and intents and things like that, but so much more. Decision and web search, it's not fair to either of these, but in my head, I kind of lump these together. Decisions having a bit of a moment right now because it does make it easier to find like academic research papers and things like that. And obviously where people have certainly an interest in COVID-related research and papers and things like that, Decision can kind of help you find those where maybe the typical Google crawler does not. Web search is, I like to call it Super Bing, which is again probably not fair to it, but if you see a lot of Microsoft speakers kind of do a broad base, like here's what Cognitive Services does, you're typically going to see a bot that has web search wired into the back end, and you tell it to search for things, and it returns results from there. Language is all I'm going to talk about here, but any of those five, if you understand by the end of this hour kind of how language talks and what the API calls look like, you can use any of those walking away from this. And the APIs can be combined. We're going to talk about some things where especially language and speech work with each other to do certain things, but you can wire any and all of these five into things that you're trying to do as well. I like to start with language because it's the one I've spent the most time in, and especially these days, most of the time, somebody who's coming to your website or who's messaging you or whatever, that communication starts as text, right? And so the more processing and the more cool stuff we can do with that kind of sets the table for everything else. This last point, you're going to hear me say this several times, but JSON is how these talk to each other. So you're going to see that we build a JSON payload to make the call, and what we get back is a JSON array as well. And so it's human readable to a certain extent. It makes me laugh that the Cognitive Services subtitles do not say JSON, they say JSON, but that's okay. But yeah, so we can read how the conversation goes, but hopefully we don't have to. So as long as you walk away from here with kind of an understanding of what that looks like, you won't have to understand it after that. So what is the language API? So like I said, there's going to be some marketing speak here. And so what Microsoft says it increases your application's ability to read, comprehend, and enrich written text. Pretty bland, right? But it's also true. And that third term is actually kind of where we're going to start. So you see in some of the marketing stuff, which I would say is maybe not a cohesive strategy around what their AI stuff does, which is a shame because it's very cool. Reading and comprehending and understanding is where we're going to spend the bulk of this time. Enriching is where we're going to go first. So there is some marketing emphasis on what they call AI for good. And the first thing we're going to talk about does exactly that. But broadly, this does all of these things. So what do I say? What's kind of the layman's term for it? It helps us in our applications, our websites, talk to users, talk to customers we already have, and talk to users and customers that we might have. And it helps their experience be better, right? So like I said, this is some of this will sound very customer focused, and it isn't that. It's just because it demos that in kind of a natural way. This doesn't have to be outward facing, but a lot of the best use cases are that. So even if you're not in kind of a customer user facing role, hopefully you don't look at that and like, well, I would never do that, because you can certainly do this stuff to do helpful internal things as well, and we'll talk about that towards the end too. Is it just one API, despite the title of the slide? No, there's a bunch of stuff that we can call here. So like I said, you'll hear people, anybody that talks about this stuff will talk about like the Cognitive Services API. Well, it's a ton of them, but it's pretty easy to slip into that term. So what are we going to talk about? So this is by no means an exhaustive list of what it can do, but for me, this is kind of the 5 featured highlights that it does. And all of these do helpful things. Like I said, we're going to start first with something that is arguably helping people consume your website or your app in a more inclusive way. And then after that, we're going to kind of depart from the AI for good stuff, though everything I talk about can be used in that way. These are more just kind of like a pure AI experience where immersive reader is just leveraging that to do certain things. So let's start. So what can I do with immersive reader? So normally this session is offered as 75 minutes, and I know we don't have that time here, and so because of that, you won't see a demo of what I do with this. But I would say, as we get to the end of this, I think the best use case for this is if you're involved in education at any level. This can be helpful. This is helpful if you're trying to teach language, whether it's people who are trying to learn a second language, third, fourth, people where their learning abilities are different. This, I would definitely dive into the demo for this, and they make it very easy. So this is not one of those where you have to go into the portal and create a bunch of stuff and no API keys and get all those to work. If you just bingle foo Cognitive Services Immersive Reader, you'll get to a page where you can put text in and show everything that I'm going to talk about here. You can see it do that. And yeah, if you're in the field of education at all, I think this is very, very cool. So the end of the marketing speak comes on this slide. So what does Microsoft say this does? You can see that first bullet point there. So it helps emerging readers, language learners, and people with learning differences absorb the written content that you're offering on your site, on your app, wherever that might be. So the next 6 points are kind of the highlights of what it does. It's not all of what it does, but it does some obvious things and some less obvious things. So first things first, it can change the viewable size of the text. So if somebody struggles with vision and things like that, you can magnify all of that and make it easier for them to read. You can also display tooltips. So if you go to the demo site, I would encourage you to use some common words or refer to common objects, and you'll see that work. Especially it seems to like food. So if you say like this apple is good, once you hit that and kind of submit that call, the next screen you're going to see has a tooltip type image where you can run your mouse apple or whatever you've put in and see that image. So that can help people that are learning a language. It helps to see that picture and kind of translate that back to that word. It can also highlight nouns and verbs and things like that. So if you're trying to teach the grammar of the language that you're involved in or trying to teach, it does that as well. It can read the content out loud. So I talked about where the APIs can play nicely with each other. This is something where we're language API and what Immersive Reader does, but it's calling the speech API to do that. And there's lots of examples like that. It can also display the syllables of words. So if you're trying to teach somebody that's new to the language how to pronounce things, that can be very helpful. And last but not least, it uses the translator API, which falls under the umbrella of the language API that we're talking about. And it can translate things to and from maybe the language that user is coming from. So very cool stuff. Like I said, don't have time to show it here, but if you're in the field of education, definitely recommend looking at that site and kind of seeing what that has to offer, because this falls very much under the AI for good stuff. So it's exercising a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about after this, but they're and while it certainly is not free after a certain time, after a certain number of calls. What they've offered here is something very, very helpful to lots of folks. But let's get out of kind of the altruistic stuff and let's talk about maybe how we can make people's experiences better on our website, on our app, and go from there. So, Luis, if you've ever gone to a site and you've seen the annoyingly helpful, annoyingly perky person that pops up in the bottom corner and says, "How may I help you?" or "I am here to help," you've likely talked to something like this. So Luis kind of rolls off the tongue. Language Understanding Intelligence Service does not. So we're going to go with the acronym from here on out. But I did want you to know what it stood for. So how does it work? So you'll note that I've tried to emphasize kind of the conversational bits of this. And Luis, we're going to start there and kind of work our way down. Luis gives you that conversational experience. So like I said, the really annoying person that pops up, it's likely this or something like this, which is what's powering that chatbot. So what does it do? So the first thing it does is it determines the intent of the statement that you've offered it. So let's say that person pops up and says, "How may I help you?" And you say, "I would like to order food from your restaurant," or something like that. It's going to parse that and say, "Oh, this person wants to order food." And then it's going to isolate the entities as well. So let's say you didn't just say, "I want to order food." You said, "I want to order a sandwich and a bag of chips." And it's going to isolate those as well. Then it's going to use those based on the model that's in some cases pre-trained, in some cases something you've trained, and it's going to answer back and kind of walk you through the conversational flow to get you to place that order. Just like I said at the start, you're going to hear me say this a couple more times. JSON is what's used to talk to it, and it's how it talks back to us as well. And you heard me say this just a second ago. There are pre-built models here that Microsoft gives us that we can just kind of plug and play and use. And I'm going to show you briefly how those work. We can create custom models as well. So the pre-built stuff falls into certain categories that probably a lot of people want to use. The custom models, you can create anything you want. You can also go heavily in code here. Everything that I'm going to show you that's not called with code, you can use the API. I'm not going to show you that because I don't like to write lots and lots of code, and some folks don't. So what I'm going to show you is actually through the Luis portal, kind of how it works and how we can build a couple simple things. So let's flip over to that. Hopefully Azure is in a better mood than it was about 30 minutes ago. And at this point, are there questions? I can't really see the chat, so I'll just ask, and if not, okay.
No questions that I can see now.
Okay, so what we've got here is obviously not anything I've built custom. So if you go to luis.ai, you'll see I'm not signed in. What you get is kind of the live demo, but in a very brief way. But it does a good job of showing what this can do, and then we'll show some pre-built models after that. So I'm not going to show you booking flights because most of us are not, because we can't, and that makes me sad. So let's talk about ordering food instead. So somebody has come to my pizza restaurant site, and they've said, order me 2 pizzas. So how does Luis interact with that? And then how might the response follow on from that? So there are intents defined on the model that this talks to. And so you'll see, basically, if you kind of read through these 4 things here that I'm highlighting, you'll understand what these are. So there are intents in this model that are food order, none, location finder, reminder, book flight. So order me 2 pizzas. The first thing it does is say, what is this person trying to do? Their intent, I'm 99% sure that they're ordering food because I said order me 2 pizzas. So we've got that. And then it classifies the entities after that because that next conversational prompt, it wants to make sense. And so this is kind of how it breaks your statement to it down. So it pulls a number out. Says order me 2 pizzas, and the number there is 2. And then there's a food type, and we'll talk about how these types get created. There's a couple of different ways, but pizzas. So it's broken down a pretty simple statement into intents and entities, like I said. Let's take a closer look at kind of how this looks in action. And this login never goes as fast as I really want it to, but the problem is if I sign in, I can never get back to that. So, all right, so let's show this. So this is, like it says, kind of a chat app I've built. You would normally layer a chatbot over this. Chatbots very much deserve their own session, so you're going to hear me refer to that, and I can certainly offer you resources if bots are your interest here. I don't show that in this session because there's only so much time, but what the bot is talking to, I'm showing you kind of all of that. So you'll see here where I've created a chat app where you would lay like a restaurant bot over this. You'd have that very helpful person show up in the bottom corner. And so what we've got here are intents, and it's kind of what you would think it might be, right? We're changing a reservation, we're confirming it, we're finding it. So for like front of house folks, we're rejecting it. And so you can do all of that through this. So let's have a look at change reservation, and let's look at some of the examples. So you see these train and test things here. As you create your model, you can hit that train button as you offer examples, and those can be hand typed, those can come out of logging, for maybe you already have a bot stood up and you're still learning kind of how people talk to it and what they ask it to do and all that. You could submit all of that here and then train the model, and it will be that much smarter the next time. But let's just look at some basic examples of what this pre-built model offers. So you can see here where it's parsing the entities out of the intents. So we have intents highlighted here, but it's doing things like, well, I understand this is a time, and I've labeled it as such. I understand Barclay Prime is the name of a place, and I've labeled it as such. So it's still parsing these out of here. You can edit these as well, all of those sorts of things. So I do want to highlight this one. So this I don't know how this made it in here, but it says we need to get a hold of KFC to switch that reservation time. As a resident of Kentucky, nobody makes reservations at KFC for any reason. So as relevant as many, maybe all of these are, the one for KFC very much is not. If you're making reservations at a KFC, you're doing it wrong. Just go through the drive-through, buy your food, and go on. Anyhow, so those are intents. So you see, like, we need to call, we need to get a hold of, we need to change. We now have 7 more people, update, all those sorts of things. So that's an intent. That's a thing you want to do. And then entities are you do the thing too. And so there's a couple different types, and I want to highlight those. So meal type, you'll see we've got types here, list and machine learn. So let's do list first. That's the simplest one. Meal type is kind of exactly what you think it might be. So we've got breakfast, dinner, lunch, supper, all those sorts of things. We can add synonyms here as well. So let's say your restaurant specializes in brunch, but a lot of people will say, I want an omelet, I want breakfast, whatever. They don't say brunch. So you can add a synonym here where, the meal type that you think you are, you can kind of tie to what customers think it is and make that conversational aspect friendlier. So that's list. So we just type that in. The machine learn type is something different. So let's go to cuisine here. So you see what we've got is it just says that, right? But examples is where this kind of opens up. And this is where the model training kind of comes into focus for us. So for these pre-trained things, they're already trained. They know how to identify this. They have examples, both good and bad. But in these examples, you can kind of see where it's pulling the entities out of this. So you've made reservations at a sushi restaurant. You don't know where. You ask it this, and if you highlight that, it says, sushi, that's a cuisine type, right? But it's not a list. I haven't said cuisine types are sushi, tacos, pizza, hamburgers, so on. It's pulling those out. It's using, in a layman's term, context clues to understand what those are. So we've got sushi, we've got Italian, kind of a similar thing here. You'll note here's the address entity as well. So even though we're looking at examples of cuisine type entities, it's kind of pulling everything out of these that it can. Tacos, maybe not a cuisine type, but always good. So that's kind of how these work. So entities are the thing that your intent is what you want to do. Entities are the thing you're doing it to. So I talked about pre-built models. Let's kind of briefly browse through those. So these kind of hit the highlights of a lot of things you might want to do with this, where you don't want to train a model, you don't want to offer it a bunch of examples and ingest a bunch of data, you just kind of want it to do cool stuff. So calendar, email, home automation, so smart home things, hey thing, turn on my lights, lower my blinds, you can do all that here. And they have a lot of the entities and intents you would want to do that. Restaurant reservation is what we've browsed. We also have places, weather, things like that. So let me show some custom stuff very briefly here. All right, so what we've got is this is actually something I built for another project. And to the great disappointment of my family, it's built to order donuts, but it's not wired up to a donut restaurant. So you can't actually order donuts from here. But what I want to show you is how kind of smart these are out of the box with just a bit of training. So I've done some basic things here where, I want to build a conversation. So I want it to agree, if the user says, can I order a donut here? Here's kind of some basic ways to do that. But let's go straight to order donut. All right, so what you've got here is, you see it says, let me have a donut. Can I get a single donut? Can I get one donut? Kind of all variations on give me a thing. So even though you're never supposed to type in a demo, let's do this. So this is basically all. You can just see I've got very basic things in there. And so I show Q&A Maker after this. Q&A Maker is not as smart as this. And this is, I kind of want to show this example to set that off. So there are things in here about can I have, let me have, can I get. So I'm going to say, can I order a pizza? And this is basically testing kind of the chat experience of talking to this model. So it knows already, even though I've given it very little to work with, like donut is in every statement here, but that's about it. If I say, can I order a pizza? It's quite sure that the intent that I'm after is not order donut, which is really the only one that I have. So, this was built with really just a few minutes of work. There's a lot of intelligence here. We're going to see in the next demo where Q&A Maker much simpler to set up, but doesn't bring the same level of intelligence that we have. So let's go back to the slides. Okay, all right. So Luis looks like that. It's that deserves its own session for sure. And actually, my friend Sam Nazar has given a session on that. I'm not sure if it's still a part of his rotation, but he's SAMNASR on Twitter, and well worth a look. He kind of piqued my interest into what we can do there, and Luis for sure deserves its own hour and probably its own full day as well. But we've just kind of scratched the surface of what that conversational aspect is. So let's go to something simpler. And I know I get feedback on this sometimes that I demo these in the wrong order, but it's actually intentional. So Luis offers a very rich conversational experience. Q&A Maker does not, but it's way easier to set up. So like I said, I set up something pretty simple for that last thing, 10 or 15 minutes. We talked about ordering donuts, pizzas, those sorts of things. But it's not a rich experience. If I layered a chatbot over that, we can't do much. It's not going to say much. Q&A Maker, the demo that I'm about to show you, took the same amount of time to wire up. It offers much more information, but it's not as conversational. So let's talk about why that is. So there's obviously machine learning going on underneath all this stuff, but Q&A Maker is not intended to be a rich experience. It's intended to offer an answer to your question, thus the name. So it serves information interactively. The demo we're going to look at here in a minute does exactly that. We're going to talk to a chatbot. We're going to ask it things. It's going to offer things back. But it's not very smart, and we'll show why that is. It drives off what are called knowledge bases, which are basically documents, files. So like it says here, it could be a web page, could be a tab separated values file, not CSV for some reason. It can ingest Word documents, Excel sheets, all those sorts of things. So is it similar to what we've just shown? Kind of. So like I said, Luis is much smarter, much richer, but more complicated to set up. This is very much a fixed offering. So basically I'm pointing a conversational experience at a document, and you're asking the document questions, and you can enrich that a bit. We're going to talk about that on this next slide, but it is very much fixed. Like, I want to ask this Word document questions is basically what you're doing here. So the flexibility comes from the information, not how you've it. So we can add some kind of rich cues to the experience here, but customization is pretty limited. So on that note, let's get to the demo of this. And hopefully my screen is still sharing. Is it?
It's sharing, yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, the border around the screen went away, so I was a bit disconcerted. But anyhow, okay. So what I've got here. So what kind of sets the stage for this is, as I mentioned in one of the early slides, I like to drive cars fast. And let's say my wife says I've been very, very nice this year, and she wishes to buy me a spectacular gift and send me and my friends somewhere to drive cars fast, even though we're not supposed to be traveling right now. Let's just suspend all of that and say my wife wants to buy me a really awesome gift and send my friends with me to watch me drive cars fast. So what we've got is we have a knowledge base here. So I've already gone ahead and signed into this Q&A Maker. Not signed in, you don't really have like the demo experience that we showed in the last slide. It's just kind of a page like, here's what it does. So I've signed in to show you this. And so let's look at the knowledge base that I created, and I'll show you how to create your own, and then we'll see actually how this works. If the bot test framework is playing nice with me. And of course, this thing that loads in a second is currently taking much more than a second. So let's work this kind of a different way. And so what I fed this bot with is this. So I don't know anything about this place. So if you've come to this session, you're like, I'm going to do everything Matt says, and I'm going to attend this place because it sounds awesome. I don't know if this place is good or bad. I don't know if the cars are nice. I'm not even certain that it's safe. But they made a very usable demo for what I'm trying to show. So they have an FAQ page right here, and it's kind of structured exactly like you think, right? There's some basic things, there's some bulleted lists and answers, all those sorts of things. So hopefully this has, no, this is still not playing nice. Wonderful. Okay. So let's go to create instead. So I want to so had that worked, what I would have showed you is basically sets of questions and answers that are ingested straight from here. So you'd see questions on the left side of the screen, answers on the right. You have the ability to offer some alternate text there as well. So if the logging from your chatbot says that a lot of people are asking a question in a certain way and it's not how it's phrased here, you can add that as kind of a synonym there. So you'll respond to the question the way they ask it instead of the way it's written here. And so, yeah, this is fairly basic list, right? Can I bring guests? Do you offer group discounts? Can I drive my own car? When are you open? All those sorts of things. So how did I make this? So no joke, this took me about 5 minutes. It makes for a lousy demo because actually the Azure provisioning takes a few minutes. So I'll kind of walk you through this, but we're not actually going to make one. And in theory, if Azure wants to play nice with me, we're going to see this in action afterwards. So first things first, we have to create a Q&A service. You click that button here. If you're paying attention at the lower left of the screen, you'll see that portal link where it's going to take you to a link to name it and say what region it's in, what subscription, pricing tier, all that fun stuff. From that step one, once that's finished, you come back here and then you offer it kind of some of the things like what's my Azure directory ID, subscription name of the Q&A service you made in step one, and then the language. So I do want to call your attention to that. You'll see there's, and it's a little bit hard to see on a Mac here, but there's kind of two offerings. So chit chat and extraction available. So what this means is your bot will talk back and forth to you and the languages listed here. But it can extract out of many more languages than that. So here we've got a list of 9, right? Extraction, much longer. You can see I can scroll off the screen and see that. So it can give that information. With some added work, you can use the translator API to kind of translate this into the languages that it wants to talk through. But very cool stuff here. And, the 9 languages here do offer a lot of flexibility. It doesn't cover everybody, but a lot of visitors to your site likely speak some variation of one of those 9. So anyhow, so we've done that. We said our bot is going to speak this. We've named it. So you can just name it kind of whatever you want. And then we populate it. So like I said, tab separated values, PDF, doc, Excel sheets, all those sorts of things. If you have kind of the layout of a conversation, so I said this isn't a rich conversation experience, but if you have a document that kind of lays that out, that walks users through like a conversation path, it can, like it says, pull that multi-turn extraction out of the document, but you kind of have to tell it it's there. So you can check that if it's not just a simple question and answer pair. If it's kind of a richer experience that's written, you can check that and it's going to pull that out of there. The way I created the demo that we're going to see is I took this URL right here and I copied and pasted and dropped it right there. I didn't do anything else. And if it was actually showing you what it's supposed to show you, you would see the questions and answers pulled in to the knowledge base that I did. You can give it a chit chat personality. So let's say your brand or your app or your site or whatever has, you want to have a particular personality. You can select one of these 6 here and kind of give it that. And then last but not least, you click on this button. 5 minutes later, you have a thing that you're able to talk to in theory. So I'm going to give up trying to go to there, and hopefully this bot works. So I will say, though, in practice, actually running this on a site works well. The test and web chat part of the portal here, a bit flaky. So here again, if it doesn't work, I'll tell you what it would have said. So let's ask it, can I bring guests? So we saw that on the FAQ site, and what this is a web app bot, like it says, layered over the knowledge base that I made from the Miami Exotic Auto Racing site. So can I bring guests? I've asked it a thing. It should give me an answer. Excellent. So it is. Yes, guests are free to join. So in Luis, I talked about where it's pretty smart. and it kind of understands what I'm asking it, even if I ask it in weird ways. And part of that's because we can constantly train that model. There's just more intelligence underneath it. Here there is not. So it oftentimes is matching terms from the knowledge base to a thing I've asked. So I asked it, can I bring guests, intentionally, because that's what the site says. And it says, yes, guests are free to join. If you go back and look at this, it said exactly what it's supposed to, right? Cool. But let's say I didn't ask it like that. Let's say I asked it, can I bring other people? So for you and I, sounds like the same thing. For Q&A Maker, it's not. So you see it it's not as rich an experience because I've got other here. It used, and kind of similar to how the subtitles for these slides are actually working, it uses words on the slides as context clues to make sure that the captioning is accurate-ish. This does a very similar thing. So it sees other, it gives me the answer with other, but that's not what I asked. I basically asked the same thing. Can I bring guests? Can I bring other people? It interpreted it a different way and said that I was trying to bring people in the car with me, which is not what I asked, but that's the answer that it offered. So still a nice experience. And if you go over here to channels, we'll look at that. It's pretty easy to drop this on a site. So if you go to channels, you go to get bot embed codes. There's actually going to be iframe code there to drop this on a site. So you would not send customers to the Azure portal to do this, and web design is certainly not my forte at all, but I know what an iframe is and I know how to drop one on a site, and we can do that right here. And this demo start to finish, honestly, when I built it about 10 months ago, was probably 10, 11 minutes max. It's very, very easy and cool. So let's flip back to the slides, and are there a good time to ask for questions while this spins up its thing?
No questions right now. No.
Okay, so we've talked about conversational stuff, a couple of different flavors of that. Text analytics, if you've never talked to a bot on a site, you've probably seen stuff that this does. So these are just kind of highlight, it does so much more, but the 4 sub-bullets there at the top of the slide are kind of the coolest things. So key phrase extraction, you've definitely seen. If you've gone to a restaurant review site like Yelp, you've gone to travel sites, something like that, and let's say for the restaurant it pulls out stuff and it says excellent pasta, good sauce, great wine list. That's key phrase extraction from reviews that users have submitted. That's what powers that. If you've seen like a word cloud visual in Power BI or something else, key phrase extraction is what makes that go. So you've probably been to a site where you've seen that. Text analytics in the language API is what actually likely makes that go. We can do language detection here as well. The last demo with Translator kind of shows that off. We'll talk about named entity recognition briefly. So as much as I bragged on the docs at the start, this is one where they, in my opinion, they get very confusing. So you can see in that last bullet, named entity recognition is kind of a highlighted feature. So if you go to the language API page and you click to the text analytics page from there, named entity recognition kind of gets its own part of the website. But if you read it, it says named entity recognition contains named entity recognition, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'll kind of try to break this down. So what it does, let's say you go to a site and you see something specifying like a currency or a time range or a common term or something like that. So named entity recognition is what's powering that, and it uses what is called a knowledge base, so similar to what we just saw. Wikipedia actually is the knowledge base of choice for that. And so what happens is it will identify and classify different entities in text. Then entity linking, so let's say you can click a link there and build a calendar appointment for a time range, or get exchange rates on currency, or click a link to go to a site for more information about the entity that's highlighted there. Entity linking is what makes that go. And what Microsoft says is it identifies and disambiguates, which does not roll off the tongue, the identity of an entity found in text. So, for example, say you're reading a site and it says, does this. Well, is that Venus the planet or Venus the goddess? And so it's using ML under the covers, layman's term, context clues, to know where to link you to for more information about that thing. So like I said, the docs are very unclear. Hopefully I've cleared that up a bit. If not, definitely let me know, because it's a weird thing to discuss, because like I said, I don't feel like they've done it right. But yeah, all of that is basically just extracting insights out of text and kind of pointing you in the right direction to learn more about what you're reading. Where we're going to end this slide and go to the next demo after this is sentiment analysis, and that's what got me into this stuff. So in an hour, we don't have time for me to give you the story about how I got into this. The very short version is there's a football podcast here in the States, or soccer as we like to call it, that joked about the English Premier League season being ruined 3 years ago because Manchester City was running off with it, and that they said they were going to shutter the podcast and not make any more episodes because the results in the field didn't matter and it wasn't worth talking about, and all that mattered was the feelings of the supporters online and at the stadium. And if there was a way to rank those, then they would continue the podcast. Tongue firmly in cheek, but I knew from listening to that pod that when they joked about stuff, they liked it if people tried to do that. And sentiment analysis with Azure Logic Apps is how I tried to build that. And it was actually a part of the podcast for that whole season. The podcast did live on. They had a bunch of sponsors, so I didn't think they were going anywhere. But what sentiment analysis is, before we kind of dive into how this works and stuff you can do with it, is at its most basic level, it takes a chunk of text and it scores it. So 1 is very positive. So you're never going to see 1.0. But if you see 0.9999, it knows that's a very positive piece of text. 0 is the most negative score. So you're never going to see 0.0, but it might be 0.00111, whatever. That's very negative, and it goes off the text it sees and all of that. And what was really fascinating is I started working on this, I think it was October of 2017 is when I started to kind of kick this stuff around, and how much smarter it's gotten, its ability to detect sarcasm and things like that. Very, very interesting. And as you might imagine, running analysis of tweets about English football clubs, sarcasm was pretty heavy. So it was interesting to see it kind of develop those abilities through the season and really be better at it than it was when it started. So let's have a look at sentiment analysis in action. And here we go. All right, so I've pre-baked a lot of this. So if you want to know how I built every step of this and how the API keys work and how you provision a service and all that, it makes for a poor demo for sure. But it made for also a pretty boring blog post, but useful. So if you go to my site, SQLatspeed.com, and use the search term either deep dive or Men in Blazers, which was the name of the podcast here, you'll get to a very lengthy run through of how I provisioned all of this. So like I said, I'm not going to show it here. This is very much TV food show. It's just pre-baked, and I'm going to show you I'm going to talk about how I did it rather than showing you, because it's no fun. But if you want to dive into those details, definitely hit up that post. If you have any questions, like I said, I'm SQL at Speed everywhere online, and the email is matt@sqlatspeed.com. So Logic Apps are really cool, and I like to sneak those in here, because if I made a session that said an hour with Logic Apps and Matt, nobody would come. But if I kind of throw this in under some cool AI stuff, you're going to actually see what these do. So I've done a simple, silly thing with this. Logic Apps are amazingly powerful. And really what they are, at least the way I describe them, because the marketing around this is almost non-existent, is they're event-driven workflow containers. So not containers in the Kubernetes or Docker sense, containers in like a bowl. So you just throw a bunch of stuff in and it contains it. And it's event-driven because they all need a trigger to start. So what I've done here is when a new tweet is posted against a search term that I've specified, the steps afterwards happen. So like I said, this is silly and arguably very dumb. Logic apps are really powerful though. So there are, I think, over 300 first-party connectors now. So there are workflows you can build when events happen in SAP, when a ServiceNow ticket is created, all sorts of things. So these, they're consumption-based billing. The cost is very low, and they are very, very powerful. They can even do basic ETL and things like that. So if there are things in your current work, so let's say none of this AI stuff, you're like, well, this is cool, but I don't do this at work. Logic apps may help you. If you're doing anything in the cloud at all and it triggers off a thing, like somebody submits a ticket or an issue or sends an email with a certain phrase or something like that, Logic apps can be wired up to automatically respond to all of those things. But like I said, I've done something silly with it. So as an example, I've brought the Twitter connector into this and created a trigger that says when a new tweet is posted with a certain search text. So this is not English football, obviously. It is dogs. So when a new tweet is posted about a dog, do the things after this. And you can see from the tooltip there what the search terms can be. So it can be a multi-word phrase. As long as you put in quotes, it can be a hashtag. Fun fact, when I started doing this in the fall of 2017, it did not support hashtags, so you couldn't do that. You can also monitor tweets just from a certain handle, and then obviously kind of just free phrasing after that. So on the search text of dog, everything below this will kick off. Another thing I want to highlight, and I go into excruciating detail of this on my blog about how this was set up. So this says how often do you want to check for items? Seems straightforward. From a cost management perspective, it is very much not. So the blog has the story, but long story short, the first time I ran the 20 Logic apps, so for each club, what I learned is I had set it for 15 minutes. So most football matches are going to be roughly 105 minutes, right? So you've got a 15-minute halftime, you've got 90 minutes of match, and we wanted to sample the Twitter sentiment basically 7 times. However, when you're monitoring tweets about football clubs that people follow all over the world, there are tweets coming all the time from everywhere, from every time zone, from every person. They never stop. So the way this timer actually works is a Logic app. So these are serverless and stateless in theory, but this spins up every time a thing happens. So, when a new tweet was posted, you get a new run of the Logic app. And the counter really only starts, and they still haven't fixed the documentation for this, despite me asking them to. The counter only starts when the tweets stop. So when you're monitoring a very busy handle like those were, or let's say a major brand or something like that, the tweets never stop. The counter never restarts. My Logic apps and Cognitive Services calls ran consistently for hours and cost me several $100s, which they thankfully refunded at the end of the day. So there's more details than that, and the blog goes into details about how you can manage that cost. So I say all that to say, if you want to be mindful that this lies. It doesn't start and stop every minute. It starts after the last tweet stops. So obviously, if I were to actually run this, it's never going to stop because there's always tweets about dogs. But anyhow, so that seems pretty straightforward. We've talked about why it's not. But what it does is, so it goes and uses the Twitter search API to look for that. Look for tweets that contain the search text dog. From there, and you'll see this is kind of a different header image here. I go to the detect sentiment action on the text. So how does the tweet text get in here? So this connector up here offers me what they call dynamic content, but it's a rich data set of every item from the tweet. Is there media attached to it? What's the tweet text? Who tweeted it? User description, username, user location. How many followers do they have? Is it a tweet? Is it a retweet? All those sorts of things. I'm just interested in the text. And so the detect sentiment action, which is wired to a pre-provisioned cognitive services resource here in Azure, which again, full details on my blog of how you do that. The demo would be very boring. I pulled the tweet text here, and then what this outputs is kind of what I tell it to, but this is a member of the data set going forward. So you see a Power BI streaming data set here. Unfortunately, the workspace this was connected to is no longer active. So we've got a warning message. But if Power BI is your thing, you can stream all of this information to a streaming data set there and do dashboards and all that kind of stuff. What is still active is there's an Azure SQL database that all this stuff could land in. And so I make the connection. You see it down here where I've got a database named a certain thing. I've already set that up. Again, doesn't make for a good demo. It's just kind of there. I've specified the table name in the database that it's wired to. And then where I showed the dynamic content from up here makes another appearance down here. So I specify my table. It says those fields. Then I populate those fields with things from the database. And you see sentiment score gets score, and you'll notice the different header image here, and not coincidentally, it's the same as here. So I'm able to combine results from all the data sets, from all the actions here, and then drop this in an Azure SQL database, and then we can query it from there. You'll note you actually get the JSON hint if I kind of hover over this, kind of what that looks like. So that's very much a crash course into this stuff. If there are more questions, definitely contact me. But logic apps are really, really cool. So even if the AI stuff is not for you and you found me really boring, logic apps are awesome, and I hope you play with those. So last but not least, let's talk about translator text. So translation is cool. This is a very fun thing to play with. It doesn't just translate. So this seems obvious. What can I do with translator text? I can translate text. There's a couple different ways that it does that. So there's neural machine translation, known as NMT, that uses neural networks to perform the translation. It's more precise, it's faster, all of those sorts of things. There's another flavor of this that Cognitive Services uses for some languages called statistical machine translation, or SMT. It is not as fast, not as precise, but still pretty good. The majority of languages use NMT, and it's actually stated on the site that the goal is for all of them to use it, but it takes, it takes dev hours to make that happen. But if you go to the translator API page, it will show you what languages are being translated using NMT and what are being translated using SMT. So translate is obvious, right, by the name. Transliterate, less obvious, but very cool. So obviously not every language in the world uses a common alphabet. This is capable of not only translating stuff, but changing the alphabet that it's shown in. And you'll see when we look at the code, it's actually, you add one parameter to something I've done, and you can get it in a very different alphabet as well. So for accessibility reasons, let's say you have lots of users that speak a lot of different languages and all that, you can make your site or your app pretty accessible quite easily. It detects the language as well, which makes sense. We'll see that. So it knows what it's translating from, which always helps. And obviously you can look up word translations, phrases, things like that. Strictly speaking, text here. Speech does a lot of the same things. The demo I'm going to show you here in one slide right now actually does all that. And if you understand kind of the JSON we're sending and we get back, then the speech service is going to be a pretty easy lift for you. So hopefully This was the thing that was not playing nice earlier. Hopefully, it is playing nice. Yay. Connection is good. Okay, so what we've got, let's kind of show you the translator API in action. So this is a simple C# console app, largely built on one of the Cognitive Services quick starts. Pardon me. So, like I said, the documentation is actually really good. And I built this demo. I've tweaked on it some, but it's built off a quick start. If you go look up Cognitive Services Translator, one of the highest web links is going to be to this page that talks about all the method calls that are here. And then there's a C# quick start that, despite what it says, doesn't exactly work out of the box, but you're about 90% of the way there. And so I tweaked the other 10%, and here we are. So we're running a console app. And the last time I ran this, I actually spoke at SQL Day a couple days ago. So one of the languages I'm translating to is Polish. You'll see that. So thank you for having me never type live in a demo, right? That's SQL Friday. So I've punched that in. Magic. Things come back. So what we've got here, so I talked about how it does language detection. So for translation, that's important. This is kind of a silly example. It's 100% confident that English is what I spoke to it, which makes sense. So we've translated it now into 4 languages down here. So Polish, German, which I speak a little of, so I know that that's right. Italian, which I speak none of. I hope it's right. And if you're a Star Trek fan, one of the supported of the 62 languages that it translates via NMT, Klingon is one of those things. So
I love that they put the time in to translate the Klingon.
Yeah, when I saw that, I thought it was a joke, but then I started playing with this, and I guess it works. I don't speak Klingon. Star Trek is fine. I like it. Klingon is not a language that I speak. I assume that that's right. But so what we've got, so we have, it's not pretty. Like I said, it's console app, so it is what it is. So we have this kind of outputted nicely, but what do we get back? And then I'll show you kind of what we sent. So I have this set to output the JSON array that we get back. So we get the detected language, which we see here, but we've got here, and then we get a JSON array of translations. And so we've got the text and then the to. So that's the language that we translated to. And you'll see we've got text, blah, 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 to Polish, text, blah, 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 to German, so on. So let's have a look at how this code actually works, and then we'll wrap this up. So up above here, I have my API key and some other stuff. For a normal production app, you would not have your API key in the code. You would secure it in an environment variable or something like that. I'm not going to show you my API key because then you could just call my stuff and spin my Azure bill, which would not be nice. So we're going to start here. So this is, as you can see, kind of a normal API call. So we've called translate API version 3. So where I talked about the very basic elements of what sentiment analysis does, what I was referring to is basically version 2. Most all of the Cognitive Services language stuff is on version 3, and they've enhanced some of the things that it does. For instance, sentiment analysis can actually score sections of text versus just one score. It will tell you the first third is neutral, the middle third is angry, and the last third is happy or something like that. But yeah, so we've specified a version here, and then we've got 2 each language that you saw output on the console. We've got some things here to read in from the console, and then we serialize what we've sent and we send it off. And there's some other stuff here that builds the call. So we're doing an HTTP post for the call. We're adding the endpoint and the route, which are specified above. Like I said, I'm not going to show that to you, so you can't use mine. We've got our subscription key and our region, which is a new thing. That's one of the things a quick start demo lags a little behind the actual release. So the code you pull from there is not entirely right, but mine is, as we just saw it work. And so we've got some things here. It makes an async call and says, hey, send this, and I'm going to wait for it to come back. Then we deserialize the JSON that comes back, and it's a simple for each loop to write out all the different translations. And I could have done transliterations the same way. All I would have had to have changed is probably a couple names, and then where you see these two here, the parameter is actually to script, and you would offer kind of the language code for the alphabet that you're trying to transliterate to, and then it would output that as well. So I'm not a C# dev by any stretch, but like I said, this I probably built in about 20 minutes when I started doing this talk earlier this year. Had to make some significant changes for the new release this week, actually, which was kind of fun. But yeah, this stuff, it's not that hard to do. So let's bring this home and let's talk about, well, that's not being very nice. Okay, now it's being nice. All right, so let's talk about some things we can do with this stuff. So, like I said, this slide is called "What Can Companies Do with This Stuff?" But what can we do with it? So, immersive reader, we talked about that. If you're in the field of education at all, very, very cool. If you're trying to learn a language, if you're dealing with folks that have different language abilities and things like that, immersive reader is awesome. Does all kinds of cool stuff, very helpful things. From there, we talked about what Luis can do, and that it's really the most conversational piece of anything we talked about here. You can build a very rich experience there if you want to. You know, what we showed, everything I showed you was typed through a site. We can build that with API calls as well, but I don't like to write code, so I didn't do that. But you can do that. Q&A maker. For data professionals, this is actually my favorite because I can think back to the jobs I've had where a lot of the questions I fielded is, what server is this client on, or what database does this client have, or what data center does this live in? And it's annoying, and when you're fielding those questions all day, it kind of derails you from what your actual job is. If you have a spreadsheet that is you know, kind of a list of that, like this environment's this, and these customers are on it, and it lives here. You could feed that to Q&A Maker pretty simply, and then when people say, hey, what environment is this, or what customer is at what data center, they can just talk to a bot, very similar to what I showed you, and ask it that, and they don't have to bug you. So if you have that information somewhere, you can serve it up in a way. Basically, people can talk to the documents. They don't have to talk to you, which is normally a very good thing. Text analytics, we talked about what it can do. So if you or your company have any sort of online presence at all, sentiment analysis is very important. I actually have a whole session that talks about why that's important. Social media kind of magnifies, you know, any misstep that a brand or an employee of a brand makes. Sentiment analysis enables you to act on that very fast. You can combine it with key phrase extraction and other things like that. So, you know, let's say you've released a new product, a new version of software, whatever. If you have a knowledge base or a support forum or something like that, you have the ability to analyze that text quickly. Logic Apps is just one of the ways you can do that, but it's easy. You don't have to write any code to do that. And then, like we said, or like we saw, you can trigger actions off that. You can say, oh, if the sentiment analysis of this bit of text is below a certain score, then send an email to marketing or customer support or something like that, or, you know, message a user a gift card if they're particularly upset. You can automate all of that based on what we just saw. Translator text, obviously, translates stuff. A very quick story before we get to the very last slide is I know of a company that's fairly close to me that their localization strategy for some product documentation was originally to send customer support folks to language learning classes to then translate the documentation from there. That's not going to work. Translator text, you can base, you know, you could take all the code that I just showed and you could feed it a whole bunch of text, and you're going to get, you know, 95, 98% of the way there. You should still have somebody who speaks that language, ensure that like idioms and things like that are properly translated and you haven't accidentally put something offensive in there, but the cognitive services translations are pretty sound. You don't have to train a bunch of people to speak a language so they can write it, so they can transform your documentation. You can feed a simple app like that a bunch of text and translate it from there. So I hope you thought that was cool. I love talking about this stuff, even when it's dark outside. These are all the ways to find me. My resources slide is here, and let me know a way that I can kind of upload this, or if you go to sqlatspeed.com/resources, all those links are here. And
I think I'll just put a link to the resources on the website instead of copying, because if you make an update to a slide or a deck or something, then it's better to have a link to it, I think.
Yes. And yeah, those are all the different ways to find me. So anybody watching this live or later, definitely hit me up if there are questions, comments, concerns, any or all of that. So yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And sorry to everyone who watches this afterwards who wanted to attend live that I messed up the timings on the meetup. Promise to be more careful when I save the events next time. So back to sleep or go to work? What's next for you?
I'm gonna cook some breakfast and then I'm going to work.
All right. Good start.
All right.
Thank you for taking the time in the morning to come to SQL Friday. And I don't know when it happens, but I guess I will meet you at the summit, or I know you're in a normal year you travel a lot, so maybe on SQL Saturday or something. But it's going to take a while. So.
I guess we crossed paths in Vienna last year, but I didn't come and find you. So
I think when I thought about it, I think we actually sat, in the guest house. I think I sat opposite to you when I came late, so I just had a beer and then we went back to the hotel.
Oh, maybe so. Yeah, it's well, as soon as I'm allowed to go anywhere other than here, you'll probably find me at an event speaking sometime, or just at an event drinking beer and listening to people smarter than I am talking about stuff.
I mean, me speaking is the kind of excuse to take the cost to go to a conference, but I enjoy more listening to someone else and, having a beer with brilliant people afterwards.
That's the best part, right? Is like, all right, you're there, and yeah, that's kind of the excuse. Like, you can tell your family, oh yeah, they picked me to speak, I have to go. But yeah, getting to hang out with people a lot smarter and hear all the cool stuff they're doing is really the most fun part.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of inspiring because you hear stories and you go back home and you realize that some of the stuff that people do, I can actually do myself, or at least learn some of it, which I haven't touched before. Like this AI stuff has been kind of magic to me, but now I've had Marquez and you present things that, I mean, when I look at it, yeah, I could probably start getting into that.
Well, that's kind of the way I built this. Like, it's not a deep dive into it. And I've done, once my example of this made it on that podcast, I built a session around it. And what's been fun over the years is occasionally I'll get an email from somebody. They're like, oh, I built a dashboard for us to look at our, marketing responses or something. And what's been really cool is I got one where they're like, oh, I built this and I got a bonus. And then somebody else is like, oh, I built this and my company didn't like it, and I showed it off in a job interview to somebody else, and I got a job that pays me a lot more, which is awesome. So yeah, lots and lots of fun. So yeah, thanks for having me. This is always good. Actually, my last live presentation of the year. So
all right, so it's an honor to be that one then.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go cook. So bye for now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll see you around.
See you.
Bye.